Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It's me again. It's Monday again, July 24th, 2023. It's time for a real live show. We're back from vacation. I never want to do this anymore. I'm moving away to wherever the hell I was. It was wonderful. I had a great time. It was hot, but not as hot as they said it was going to be, which was great. And that's it. I don't know. I learned a lot, and I saw a lot of good stuff, and I'm sure we'll find ways to work it into the conversation along the way. But there's a lot to catch up on, of course. And I don't know any of it because I missed it all because I wasn't paying any attention. Partially intentionally not paying any attention, but partially also we couldn't make the TV in the hotel room work. So I couldn't have seen news on TV even if I wanted to. I was actually interested in seeing, could I watch local channels? I don't know what the local channels are down there. They must have them. I just can't make the TV work. So, but you know, it was kind of a news vacuum. The only news I could see that I would allow myself to see anyway was what came over, the various social media channels that I was able to access via phone. I had a laptop with me too, but didn't open it much, except to make sure that the reruns and 1 hour specials were working and the things were posted. Everything was a little bit late, of course, because, you go out, you do things, you lose track of time. And, getting back to the hotel room, and it's not an exciting thing to do, to call an outing to a close so that you can run back to the hotel room to make sure that it's something posted on the internet. But anyway, we managed to make things work. Everything was fine. Some nice emails of appreciation for some of the throwback episodes. We went way back to 2016 with those. And sometimes they're a little bit more telling, a little bit more useful than a more recent rerun. It's sometimes interesting to look back. Where were we a year ago? And in the Trump era, I suppose that made a little bit more sense because, things could multiply in terms of crazy in matters of hours, much less days or even years. But I guess in a period of relative normalcy, it's interesting to look back. And it was particularly interesting to look back to a time that prior to Trump's actual term in office, when we were just pretty sure that he was a dumb guy who was going to lose very badly. And then he didn't. So, it was interesting to look back in that respect. Like I said, lots of other interesting things that occurred to me. But yeah, not much in the way of news. I did see some of the bigger things that happened, but now events have overtaken them. So we'll see what Greg has by way of roundup and take our cues from him. And then we'll dive back. I did pocket a lot of things and bury a lot of the things that I initially pocketed at the beginning of the week under more garbage as the week went on. But like I said, a little bit of a news desert there. What didn't seem to be the top concern of most of the people that I saw during the day. Although I will say I did hear news on the radio once or twice when we were driving places, or in this case, being driven somewhere. We were on an excursion for an outing, which was terrific, and we saw lots of great things. And but I heard, they had the music station on, but we were in Bahamas, as I may have mentioned, and in particular, we were out in one of the out islands, the Exuma Islands, and there are many of them, as it turns out. But listening to the radio and listening to their version of the news, they would break from the music. Here in the United States, you get, on one of the music stations, you get a 30-second update, and they say, we got 30 seconds to bring you the news. For one thing, McDonald's has introduced a new spicy chicken sandwich. For another thing, the president died, and also it's going to rain. That's the news. Now back to the music, and here at this Bahamian station we were listening to, I don't know if it's typical of all of them, but different sort of approach, and I think it was a sort of a public radio. I think it's all kind of public radio, actually, but a long news break and an in-depth look at a lot of things that really don't make the news around here. A lot of interesting reportage. So congratulations to the Bahamas who have gotten their act together and know how to use their public media. I was very impressed, actually. But then I didn't learn anything else because I didn't listen to the radio very much. I did give myself a chance to drive around a little bit, and as you may know, they drive because of the British colonial history on the wrong side of the road, which was real interesting to try to get used to. And between that and potholes and crabs crossing the street at odd intervals, it made driving a little harrowing. But we're back. There's no crabs on the road. Just me, a crab on the radio, and Greg Dworkin is here to say hello. So, hi, Greg. How you doing?
Krabby
Okay.
patties.
Yeah, we made quite a few Krabby Patties. We did my best not to run over them, but the seagulls were having a blast.
Well, that's a good thing.
Yeah.
So I'm a little hoarse.
Hey.
That's okay. Nothing else wrong.
Okay, that's good.
A lot happened.
Yeah, as it turns out.
And since you mentioned the Bahamas and overseas, let me just throw in a couple of overseas things which are sort of semi-important. In the United Kingdom, Rishi Sunak and the Tories lost 2 out of 3 by-elections, as they call them. And in fact, Labour and the Lib Dems won their respective races and got rid of Tory representatives. And in the third election that took place, the Tories barely held on, like a W in Florida margin, like 500 votes.
Yeah. Huh.
So it was an awful showing for the Tories, and just suggest that when the election happens next year, they're going to lose and lose big. People will hold their nose and vote for Labour, even though they're not real keen on Labour, because Labour never really defines exactly what's going on. And there's a ton of stories about Britons finally coming to the conclusion that maybe Brexit wasn't a good idea.
Well,
and if you ask them, that's what they tell the polls.
Okay.
Which was funny because, as you know, we followed this on the show, and a lot of the conservatives, as I've mentioned, part of your problem is that Brexit failed. No, you just don't understand. Brexit really worked. You just don't get it. You don't understand well, actually, they're the ones that didn't get it. And finally, after all this time, Brits are actually understanding what's going on.
Well, good.
So there's that. Over in Ukraine, we have lots of things happening. The Ukrainians attacked the bridge to Crimea again. What is it, the Kursk Bridge? They damaged the roadway more than they damaged the railway. So in terms of logistics for the Russians, it's unclear how bad it is. It's bad because the Russians are starting to use the roads because they couldn't trust the railways. And every time they gather stuff in one place, the Ukrainians blow it up. Well, so I have a very short thread on that by Michael Weiss, who just gives you an idea of what's going on here. And he's translating an analyst, unnamed, but goes by the handle Karl, Karl, not his real name.
Oh, how do we?
But a very good analyst who he often quotes, and says there's been no major changes on the front. Ukraine's been able to make very slow progress in 2 to 3 directions in the south. They've been able to advance a bit more around Bakhmut, and the pace is not fast.
All right. Well,
but what he points out is that what they've done is Russia has concentrated large forces between Crimea and Kupiansk to reduce the pressure below Bakhmut. And Ukraine's continued to do what it did before. What they're doing is destroying logistics, and Phillips B. O'Brien has pointed this out as well. The idea isn't to look at a map and see how far the line between the Russians and the Ukraine moves on the map by day or by week. What's happening is that Ukraine has decided, correctly in Phillips P. O'Brien's view, have decided to try to degrade and destroy Russia's ability to defend. You do that first, then you attack. So the fact that it looks static on the map is not telling you what's going on. And this thread sort of hones in on that. In the last hour, there was a report that a large ammunition dump near Simferopol was hit by a UAV, unmanned vehicle, airborne vehicle, and it is a drone. and it's right now detonating. The process is continuing. Ukraine has two things interfering with them. Some progress has been made in that Russian artillery fire has remained weaker, and that's been the main aim of Ukraine's activities. And they continue to demolish, on average, about 25 artillery pieces a day. On the other hand, crossing minefields continues to be a major problem. It slows down movement. And the destruction of the Crimean bridge played a greater psychological than a military role, as the road bridge was hit and the railway section was intact. Most of the logistics still come by rail, but that was changing, as I said. Russia doesn't want to do rail to truck loading in Crimea because Ukrainians just blow them up. Now they had started to bring in munitions by truck over the bridge, and that path is closed. So the Russians are only letting cars through the bridge and only on one side of the road because they want to claim the roads open.
I see.
So there's a disproportionate number of Russian soldiers in the north, but they're not really doing anything. Ukraine seems to be able to hold the line there without committing significant reserves. And it's been difficult. It is difficult to undertake a massive offensive if it results in heavy losses. It's been 6.5 weeks since the start of the counteroffensive. They must be given time. Ukraine's objective must be to reach the sea by the end of autumn. And he, Michael Weiss, quoting Karl, thinks it'll happen. And regarding criticism that Ukraine isn't able to get large units to work together, it's hard. There's only a few officers with Western training in the Ukrainian army. So in other words, you can't do a D-Day type all hands on deck, everybody invades sort of thing. That's beyond their capability.
Isn't there some sort of app that could coordinate that?
Yeah, but it's run by X, which is what Twitter used to be, so nobody wants to touch it. We'll get a little bit on that later. Twitter is now called X as of last night.
Yeah, I did come back to find
Well, that's because Q was taken.
I was wondering why they settled
also
on that.
Y and Z.
I guess so.
So they had to go with X. But it's part of SpaceX. It's part of their overall broad corporation. But again, a little bit more on that later. Karl doesn't think that the inability to coordinate large units is the main reason for slow progress. The main reason is Ukrainians can't culturally or pragmatically afford to behave in such a way that casualties max up. He's not going to run this war the way Lincoln ran the Civil War. Take tens of casualties, hundreds of casualties, thousands of casualties. Hold your nose. We have more people than they do. It's a war of attrition. We'll eventually win. Russia could do that, but Ukraine can't. They're the smaller country.
They don't have the people, right? They're not going to run that strategy because it's not meant for them.
Right. So basically what he says is it's working. So it's just going to be slow. And that's the update there. Perhaps the biggest news in the morning is Israel went ahead and passed that law changing the relationship between the judiciary and the legislature. Like 15 minutes ago, they passed it.
Oh, okay. Well,
despite weeks and weeks and weeks of protest. More to come on that, but it's bad news.
Okay.
On the domestic front, again, we mentioned X. It turns out that there are a lot of what you call super apps, basically based in Asia, where you go to a single place and they do everything. Online shopping, banking, communications. None of them make any money. Most of them fail. And that's the model that Elon Musk is bringing to the old Twitter. He wants it to be the hub and platform. Basically, do you trust Elon Musk to be a hub for banking because it'll be crypto?
Yeah, right. I don't.
How smart is it? The guy's an idiot.
What he's doing,
but he's rich, and so as my late aunt used to say, when a pigeon would crap on the windshield, for the rich they sing. So when you have that much money, you're eccentric.
Right.
You see barriers. There are setbacks. When you're poor and you try this stuff, it's like you're a downright idiot. Nobody's going to ever trust you again. That's the way it should be. And Elon Musk is doing his best to make X the hub of all of that.
Maybe he'll get poor.
Maybe
that would fix things.
So another quickie here, because it's going to get into some other polls.
Get poor quick scheme if you want to
get poor squick, right? Get poor squick.
Yeah.
Get poor is quick. In Ohio, there's the USA Today poll out today.
Yes.
Ohio voters back abortion rights amendment in a test case for other states. In fact, they back
I thought so.
the ability to keep access to reproductive services 58 to 32. And according to the piece, significant support crossed partisan lines, including a third of Republicans and 85% of independent women. You will recall that Ohio has a special election in August.
Crazy.
They're trying to put something on the ballot, and now that you have heard this poll, you'll understand why. That makes it so you can't pass stuff like this unless you hit 60% threshold.
Right.
I don't know if they had word of this poll or they did their own polling, but had the support been 63%, then the amendment that they're trying to pass would have made it 65.
Well, yeah, maybe.
They're just trying to stop it from happening, period.
Yeah. There's this whole thing. I mean, we did discuss it a little bit early on in this story when they were just getting their plans underway to have this August special election. But yeah, you'll recall that, as I recall, the background was that some time ago, the Republicans who run Ohio got rid of the ability to even have August special elections because they were too low turnout and especially confusing and dumb. And then they realized, if we have an especially confusing and dumb August election to hold this referendum, then we'll be able to control it because it'll be super low turnout. So let's change the rule back for one thing and one thing only and try and pass this, and then the double whammy that we'll pass this measure that makes it so that you need to have 60% threshold in order to make something stick on a referendum. It's garbage, but everyone's awake
and they're going to lose on that, by the way.
Yeah. Well, good.
And then they're going to lose, when the actual referendum comes around.
Excellent. Well, people are awake to it, and that wasn't easy to predict a couple of years, a year or two ago would have been much more difficult to have predicted this. But
after Kansas, it's a little easier.
Now it's happening kind of everywhere, and everybody's awake to it, and says, we'll have to get up and go to the
Well, it's not
polls.
theoretical. You're taking stuff away from them, and it's been properly framed as you're taking away our freedoms.
Yeah.
And people do not like that.
Right.
So that was just an intro to some of the other polling that we have out. And there's a ton of it that you blessedly missed because your TV wasn't working.
Yeah, good.
So Simon Rosenberg sums up some of the stuff. And one of the headlines I had over the weekend when I put the pundit roundup together, I think sums it up. It was more on the steep slide of DeSantis, but also Dark Brandon rising.
Okay.
And let me give you an idea. Simon Rosenberg sums up a week's worth of polling. It appears Biden, he writes, has opened up a lead in the presidential race. Monmouth, and more on the Monmouth poll in a minute, has him ahead 47-40.
All right.
Monmouth is special because it also has what happens if we had a third party. I'll get to that.
Oh.
Quinnipiac had Biden ahead 49-44, YouGov 47-43, Ipsos 37-35, Morning Consult 43-42. YouGov 42-42, but they had Trump with a 4-point lead in June, so that's a 4-point turnaround there. AARP House Battlegrounds 47-43. So although before you went on vacation, there were all these stories about the doldrums of the Biden administration, and we said, it's a bunch of crap. They're just looking for stuff to write over the summer. Once you start getting the data rolling in, all of a sudden, that's not really how it looks.
Okay.
All right. So what's happening is that Republicans simply are upset about the state of things. And that's, in effect, how they answer the polls. So it turns out a pollster I know by the name of John Covalin, who's based in Louisiana,
Okay.
has a national poll out. It's a PDF, but I'll give you the link so that you can take a look at it with me. You'll have to download the PDF, though.
Oh, dear. Okay. All right. Willing to
And
try.
you can click on where it says the poll write-up can be found here, and that'll
All right.
do it for you. And
Got it.
basically what he did is he tried to model likely Republican primary voters nationally using both registered and modeled Republican votes. The reason you have to model Republican votes is that places like New Hampshire don't have fixed registration, and some states don't have registration at all, like Georgia.
Right. Okay.
I mean, they don't tell, they have registration, but they don't tell you what it is.
Right. Now, by
So you don't have the
party.
data. It's private. So
Okay.
in New Hampshire, independents can vote in the Republican primary. You can't just go by Republicans.
I see.
That won't really tell you. What you need to do is who's going to vote in the Republican primary. And in
All
some
right.
states, independents can vote. Some states they can't. In some states, they don't tell you, the numbers well enough. So you have to model it. And here are the poll results. For these people
Who are these
that they
people?
collected and modeled,
All right.
how likely are you to vote in either Republican presidential primary or caucus next year? 93% of the respondents said they would. So it's
Good
self-selected,
model. Yeah.
right? Those that aren't going to vote didn't answer.
I see.
So these are the activists. These are the people that are most likely to vote and decide what's going on.
All right.
Do you have a favorable or unfavorable opinion of Ron DeSantis? Very favorable 30, somewhat favorable 35, somewhat unfavorable 12, very unfavorable 11.
Okay. I mean,
Okay,
he's
so
doing all right
65% or so are okay with Ron DeSantis. What about Trump? 51% favorable, somewhat favorable 20, so 71%,
there. Ugh.
right? 20%,
Why?
however, 19% exactly, say he's very unfavorable,
All right. Well, that's something.
right? And I just want to contrast that with the guy who's telling the truth. That's Chris Christie. At least he's telling the truth about both Trump and Ron DeSantis these days.
Yeah.
Do you have a favorable or unfavorable opinion of Christie? Favorable 5, somewhat favorable 15, so he's 20% favorable. Somewhat unfavorable 20, very unfavorable 45.
Okay. Well.
So the point is, Chris Christie, who's in second or third in some of these polls coming out statewide, like New Hampshire, South Carolina, okay, might look okay in terms of fighting for second, but he's never going to be the nominee because almost half the party hates his guts.
That is
I just thought we
unusual.
would put this out there. So Chris Christie's a contender, but not a contender. He's a contender in the sense he'll get enough support to make the debates. He might even have the stage to himself, and once he's on it, he'll dominate. But he can't win because too many people dislike him for telling the truth.
Oh well.
They don't like it when you tell the truth about other Republican candidates because it challenges
Well,
their
one
own
of them
views and
anyway.
makes them feel guilty that they know they're lying to themselves. I mean, it's just the basic, Chris Christie's not going to win. The person
okay. I
who
think he
did
knows that.
surprisingly best in these polls that you didn't expect would be Tim Scott, very favorable 21, somewhat favorable 30. People like him,
Okay.
and that's showing up in a couple of different ways. They asked another way of trying to get at just how deep is the support for Donald Trump. And John Kovalen is a Republican pollster, so he's not going to be like in your face about it. But here's what he asked. Did a great job, needs to be president again, 55%.
Yikes.
Only 55% of Republican primary
Yeah.
voters.
No, that's true. True.
That's terrible
Yes.
for Trump.
Yeah. And when you were just president.
Did a great job, time for new leadership, 28.
All right.
So when people say they support Trump, this poll says, yeah, but
yeah.
they support him. They thought he did a great job. That doesn't mean they want to vote for him again. A quarter of them don't.
Yeah.
Didn't do a great job, 13. So 28 did a good job, time for new leadership, or didn't do a good job. That's 41% of the Republican Party.
Yeah.
These are just weak numbers for Donald Trump overall.
That's true. I mean, Trump is weird. Maybe they should have asked, did not do a great job as president, but would do better next time. That might
Who
be
would
a
you
number.
vote for if the Republican contest were today? 53% Trump, 17 DeSantis. Tim Scott comes in at 4.5 and Christie 4.4. Everybody else follows.
That's interesting.
Mike Pence might not even make the debate. He got 3% of the poll result in this.
Yeah, well, maybe
and both DeSantis and Pence are caught in this trap because they can't say that Trump did the wrong thing on January 6th. Mm-hmm. And Christie can, but they won't vote for him because they hate him. And that's why they hate him.
Although interesting.
Pence and DeSantis are trying to mealy-mouth their way around it.
Right.
And waffle and sort of, throw smoke and hope you don't notice where they slipped out the back. Because they say things like, what he did was not appropriate, but I'm not sure it's criminal. See, the point is, if you can't attack Trump for having done something wrong, then he's still president.
Yeah.
And if he's still president, why are you running?
Yeah, what are
and
you
if
doing?
you don't have a rationale for running, well, how can you expect to win? and so none of these guys, except for Christie, has a path to explain why you should vote for me. And with Chris Christie, it's clear why you should vote for him, but they just won't because they hate him. So that's a segment for leading up to the break.
Okay. Yeah, I am also interested
Those
in
are
the fact
dynamics.
that, after hearing these stories, they hate Chris Christie. But you know what? They kind of like Tim Scott. All right, that's true. Now, how are they polling? Well, Tim Scott's polling 4.5% and Chris Christie polling 4.4%. So
right,
that's
with Trump at 53. So this is all a question of second place.
I guess so. Should we make second place the guy we hate or the guy we like? I don't know. You know what? We're closely divided on that. That's interesting all by itself, but that's just because there's nothing left but table scraps, I guess. Okay. All right, we'll be right back. All right, lawn mowing.
The other part, did you get the thing?
What, the PDF?
The
yes.
PDF?
Uh-huh.
Page 3.
3. All right.
Of 42. We're
Yes.
not doing 42. We're just doing page 3.
Yeah.
Question 14. We're going to do that next. It's fascinating.
Oh, okay. Whew. Okay. Little lawn care happening in the background. Is that?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
Sorry. Can't
we have that from time to time. And I heard a little bit of muffled Abby barking, but
she was barking at the guys.
Yeah.
Let me close the window, see if it helps.
No. All right.
Just makes it hot.
Yeah. Now you got.
They're close to the house. We're
hot.
finishing up close to the house. Hopefully by the end of the break, they've circled around.
It wasn't too bad. I mean, everybody could tell what was going on, but okay, we still hear them.
I could turn the washing machine on and drown it. People recognize it.
That's right. Couple
We got
phone
that
calls.
first half hour.
Yeah. All right. Oh. So, anyway, Bahamas is nice. Mostly it was Florida, slightly to the east, as it turns out. Everybody there was from Florida.
Yeah.
They go over for the day.
I really hate Florida.
Yeah, I know. I mean,
I visited there and I hated it when I was there.
I used to like it. Now it's no good. I haven't been there in a while, but Florida came to us. It was Florida Man in Bahamas. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio, or X as we like to call it, because we're going to sue Elon Musk for copyright. So I was an X before he was, and he should pay me $1 million.
Well, in fact, the first suit has been filed by Sesame Street. Brought to you by the letter X.
Right. Only those episodes are allowed to sue, though. They are the only ones with standing. All right. So
I don't know that they have standing. You never see their feet.
Right. That's true. We're never really sure. They're standing on somebody's hands, I guess. But Big Bird, he had feet.
I'm going to go back to this poll. I think it's important because what I'm trying to do is highlight the nuance and subtlety of Republican voters in terms of how they feel.
All right.
You can look at a poll and say, well, 75% support Trump or 66% support Trump. That's down from 80 3 years ago.
Okay.
And that's true.
At that poll.
Well, what do they really mean? They mean that, 55% think he's the best thing since sliced bread, but another quarter of them think he was a great president, but it's time to move on. And if you're thinking it's time to move on, that means you're going to vote for somebody else. And if you're going to vote for somebody else, that's not solid support.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know what happens to it in the general. I assume it shifts
I mean, a
back
lot
to
of things
him,
happen because people have cross currents and they pull different ways. And here's another way people
This
are
is
pulled.
interesting, though.
And this is, again, something that other pollsters tend not to ask in such detail, but it's good to know. Question 14 in this long poll asks, and this is the last question we're going to do. In general, how would you describe your stance on the abortion issue? Okay. Here are your choices. Again, this is Republican primary voters, self-selected. These are the activists. The most active part. You have to assume that the rest of the Republican Party is actually to the left of everything we're describing in this poll.
Oh, yeah.
In terms of general election. Maybe slightly, but still, they're not going to be to the right of this activist cohort who answered this poll.
Or they're just lazy, but even so. Okay.
In general, how would you describe your stance on the abortion issue? Pro-life and support exceptions for rape and incest. This is key.
Yes.
44%.
That's
it's key because
plurality.
Republican states are passing laws that don't have exceptions.
Yes, they were all trained for many years to say that was an exception that they were interested in preserving.
But the extreme right took over. The Christian nationalists took over the party.
Right.
The evangelicals took over the party, the white evangelicals. And now they don't have exceptions in a lot of states. And that's not where the Republican voters are. Pro-life support exceptions for rape, incest, 44%. Pro-life oppose exceptions, 23%. Pro-choice favor restrictions, 18%, and pro-choice oppose restrictions, 9%. Okay, so 27% of activist Republicans are pro-choice.
That is interesting too.
Right? Again, a little nuanced piece you don't normally see in polls. No. And of the pro-lifers, 2 to 1, they don't like the idea with no exceptions. Yeah. That's how you get a 58% want to support reproductive rights in a place like Ohio, which is clearly a red state.
Yeah. That's fairly amazing that, they've invested decades in this and they still don't have it right.
Right. And so, again, I think it's important to make those points because they, bring up the whole idea of like what's really going on here. And that's what's really going on here. So here's the summary on page 4. The rest is just detail.
Page.
All of the major Republican candidates have at least 70% name recognition, but for former President Trump and Governor DeSantis, their name recognition is unanimous. Furthermore, despite the heavy shelling DeSantis has sustained, he and Trump have strong favorabilities among Republicans. 71-26 for Trump, 65-23 for DeSantis. The only other candidate even approaching this level of strong name recognition is Tim Scott. He's got 51-13 favorability unfavorably. Nobody dislikes Tim Scott. He's just a nice guy.
All right.
Okay. Chris Christie is not a nice guy, but he tells the truth. So, you got to say they're offering Republicans a choice.
Yes.
In that regard. The challenge DeSantis and arguably any other Republican challenger faces is this. Republican primary voters have fond memories of the Trump presidency. 83% believe he did a good job, although 28% said he did a good job and now it's time for new leadership. Okay? Yeah. And that 55% residual percentage is consistently about the level of Trump's strength in various ballot tests. Like he leads 53-31 here and 55, 28 somewhere else. And in a crowded Republican field in this poll, he leads with 53%, with 17 favoring DeSantis. Republican primary voters do not monolithically consider themselves identifiably conservative on every single issue. A 39% plurality wants a candidate conservative on economic issues who's pro-life, and another 1% favors a focus only on moral social issues, but 35% want an America First candidate. And 19% favor a candidate conservative on economic issues who's pro-choice. I don't mind peeling that 19% off myself.
Yes.
Okay. And only 44 of the 67% describing themselves as pro-life are pro-life without exceptions. So people are fond of Trump. They think he did a good job. But there's not only weakness there, but the abortion issue is a loser for them.
Yes. And also they're wrong about him doing a good job.
Well, they're wrong about a lot of things.
But they don't care.
But I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about how they're going to vote on those issues.
Yes, right. I mean, they're wrong, but they're going to vote that way anyway. By the way, who's Perry Johnson?
Perry Johnson.
Yeah, I see him listed here. If you were going to
some other guy running.
Yeah, I mean, everybody else is in there. Ramaswamy, Asa Hutchinson, even the Dakota guy. Doug
Harold
Burgum.
Stassen and Lyndon LaRouche are not running this year.
Right.
Neither is Ron Paul. So
Perry Johnson.
Perry Johnson, I guess, is a stand-in for him.
I literally. Usually, I've heard of the people.
Is Leroy Jenkins listed?
Unless
Leroy
undecided.
Jenkins.
No. Oh, another no. Well, there is 1% for another announced Republican candidate. I can't think of any of who they are. If they have right all the way down to Doug Burgum in there. Perry Johnson was also, I guess, a declared candidate. I never even heard of him. He's polling less than another announced. But I mean, that's a conglomerate.
He won't be on the debate stage, so it doesn't matter.
I guess not. I'm gonna have to look up who he actually is. So, all right, that's an unusual situation.
I have no idea who he is because the only
really.
stuff I can find online are stuff he's sponsored himself.
Oh, okay. Well,
He's
maybe
a
he's a rich
businessman.
guy.
He
Okay,
announced in
that's
March.
probably what it is. All right, yeah. So
He's from Michigan. The Republican Party in Michigan is in such bad shape; it's not really going anywhere.
I looked him
There's
up
been a lot of
too.
stories about that as well. Michigan party fighting, having the police come to their conventions because they can't, stop knocking each
from
other in the
Michigan,
head, all
okay.
sorts of stuff like
Yeah.
that. But
he looks a little bit
anyway.
like it might be Martin Short in character, possibly.
could be.
So
The other big political
go.
story, of course, is not just the rise of Dark Brandon and not just Trump's stability, but the fall of Ron DeSantis.
Yes,
New York
a
Times
little
had a
bit of a
couple of
collapse.
stories on that. One of them is the steep cost of Ron DeSantis' vaccine turnabout,
yeah.
including a new analysis of the data on deaths showing that Florida led the nation there after the vaccine came out. All the other states that had a lot of deaths were before the vaccine came out because
Yeah,
DeSantis
not really
wouldn't
their
go with
fault.
it. And so he basically cost Florida a lot of lives. He's also costing them a lot in insurance because home insurance is just skyrocketing and making Florida really unlivable.
Well, all right. Maybe that's why they were all in Bahamas.
Then he had an interview with Jake Tapper. It didn't go all that well. And this is Peter Schorch, who's a Florida reporter who knows both Florida politics and the situation there, writes the next 72 hours are going to be rough in DeSantis' world. The first round of polls post-reset with Jake Tapper are coming out, and they're just bad. Okay. And then the Florida Board of Ed, I guess, put together statewide curriculum standards, including kind of whitewashing, and I mean whitewashing, the whole idea of slavery.
Oh, yes. Right.
Putting in context that slavery, benefited some people. I mean, if you were raped and tortured and beaten, but they taught you how to be a blacksmith, maybe some good came out of it.
Okay. No comment.
So Josh Marshall has a thread on that. He says a lot of discussion of Florida's new African-American history curriculum, especially the line about slavery helping slaves develop skills, which they might be able to use for their own benefit. Is that like representative? How is the curriculum as a whole? Well, I've read the whole thing. And just a reminder, Josh Marshall has a PhD in American history with a focus on the colonial period, so he knows something about the topic.
They had slavery then.
I'll focus on 3 points, he says. First, the line about developing skills isn't on its own. There's definitely a focus on discussing the variety of work and trade slaves did, and that's true. Slaves were engaged in a lot of skilled trades, especially in urban areas, and that may surprise some people, but the overall picture seems geared to de-emphasize the backbreaking agricultural labor, which was the vast majority of slaves during the 200 plus years of slavery. And the next two are more significant. A significant part of the curriculum is focused on talking about all the other societies that practiced slavery where slavery was worse, like the Caribbean and Latin America.
Yes.
But the upshot of this whole part of the curriculum is to soften the image of North American slavery. Everybody had slaves, the argument goes, and slaves in North America had it better than other people. And then finally, the third point is when we get to Reconstruction and the return of what was called home rule in the South, what we call the Jim Crow system.
Yeah.
Rather, we never quite get to it because if you do word searches, you'll find some of the words, but the whole part of that story is pretty radically de-emphasized. Okay. So the points are the ones that struck me, Josh Marshall, as the big picture problems. But when you read through it, there's lots of choice nuggets like this lesson about major figures. I mean, they picked this: identify key legislation and the politicians and political figures who advanced American equality and representative democracy. Include political figures who shaped the modern civil rights efforts like Dwight Eisenhower, John Kennedy, Lyndon Johnson, Richard Nixon, Everett Dirksen, Mary McLeod Bethune, Shelby Steele, Thomas Sowell, and John Lewis. Now, who are Shelby Steele and Thomas Sowell, and how they got on the list? They're very conservative. They had nothing to do with the civil rights movement, but Florida just wants them in there because they want to indoctrinate you about how good conservatives are.
I guess. What a weird... Well, it's not weird. It's devious, and we understand exactly what they're doing and why. But
so this comes to light, and DeSantis backpedals and said, I had nothing to do with this.
Yeah, lots of things happen in Florida.
And Chris Christie hits him and says... You're a freaking leader of the state. What are you talking about? You
this
can't
was your
hide
idea.
from this.
Right.
And that's what I mean about Chris Christie being a truth teller and why the Republican Party hates his guts.
Yeah, all right.
We're used to him up here, because when he was New Jersey governor, we heard him all the time, got sick of him.
Yeah, yeah.
But we know him. And, he's the most talented politician for just getting on the stage and talking directly to people and telling them stuff that they may or may not want to hear.
That's true.
And he did it in New Hampshire, and he's wonderful in those settings. Trump has a different talent. He's a con man. He's brilliant at that. But that's not the same thing as retail politics. That's what Christie does.
Yeah.
It's his superpower, and he's going to use it against Donald Trump. It took down Marco Rubio. We saw it in action. It's not going to take Trump down. It's going to make Christie very unpopular in the Republican Party. But it's absolutely worth a bag of popcorn to watch.
Sure. And I think he's pretty clear-headed about what it means. It doesn't really mean a path to
he's trying to position
nomination.
himself for the post-Trump future Republican Party. If
I guess so. Yeah, and in the meantime, I want to take Trump down a peg or two. And so he's not only is he better at retail politics, he's also very good at prosecutorial politics because that's what he did.
That's what he used to do.
Yeah. So
is Kamala Harris, but Christie's a white guy, so you got to give him credit for it.
Oh well, yeah, and also she's not going to be in the Republican debate.
Well, she's in the debate now because she's gone down to Florida and talked about it and gives some pretty good speeches calling that stuff out.
Oh yeah.
And Peter Sorge writes.
Debate.
The slavery remarks, however they are framed and rebutted, are drawing a reation more intense than almost anything DeSantis has said. They're worse than the Ukraine territorial
dispute. It's super dumb.
They're worse than the other culture war stuff.
And yes, oh wow, okay, here he comes now. He sent this guy to do this. They're talking about me now. They go mow his lawn. Or that sounds like the leaf blower at this point.
And the New York Times is reporting that the campaign is filtering memes to influencers and surrogates.
Yeah, I read about
and
that.
they're making like anti-LGBTQ ads, and some of them are remarkably homophobic and fascistic.
Yes.
And I have some examples in the pundit roundup. And in fact, they're now de-emphasizing those ads, either deleting them or saying we had nothing to do with them, but actually they're produced by their own staffers and then sock puppeted out so as to look like they came from somebody else.
Yes, I did hear about that.
And they got caught about that.
Yeah. Well, they're very bad
now, there's
at
two
everything.
separate ads. There's an LGBTQ anti one, which is a lot of people talking, hitting Trump for being too soft. That was a month ago.
Yeah.
And then the one they just released and then pulled back, which I also have in the pundit roundup, which is the more fascist sort of one. And they're pretty bad ads. And the whole point of the New York Times article is that basically Ron DeSantis is running an online campaign with a bunch of amateurs who had never done this nationally before. And they think it's cool if they get a lot of what you might call frog followers.
Yes. Yeah, it's a very online kind of a thing for, edgelords and weirdos. And,
exactly, and nobody else cares. And
right.
so they really need
like
to move up
they
the
don't
big
understand
time.
It.
And that's what Peter Sorge is writing about. And he says there's three, and this is a quote here. So get your horn ready.
Oh, boy. All right. Well,
I think there's a way forward for Ron DeSantis. Number one, cut the
Oh, there it is. Oh, I missed
Number
it.
two, do something.
Yeah.
Meaningful on Florida property insurance.
Okay.
Fix it.
Something.
And number three, hang on till the first debate and reemerge there. That's your ticket back. He can't do it because the basic problem with the Ron DeSantis campaign is Ron DeSantis. And that's why it's so funny to hear his campaign talk to the donors who are very nervous about it and don't like what's going on here and saying, don't worry, we're going to reboot the whole thing. The guy's a freaking robot. Don't say pudding.
Yeah.
Don't say reboot. Don't make it sound like you're an app or an Android.
Yeah.
That's your problem. People think that about you anyway. Don't describe it like that. Can you imagine being a staffer going in and having to tell his wife that? Because she runs the campaign, really.
Yeah. I guess they just must be real fans of the online life. And yes, that's what the gist that I got from that article about speaking to the donors is that they don't like what they see. Especially those videos really produce a lot of negative reaction, but they don't like them, they don't understand them, and they don't like that they don't understand them. There's like 3 levels to this, and they just think, it's something that my kids might understand, and they say it's cringy. So I don't like this whole idea. And also, where did all our money go? That was another angle on that story that they pointed out, that he's burned through like.
He's broke.
Yeah.
He spent all his money on fancy planes and such.
Yes, and booking fancy hotel rooms to talk to the big dollar donors, and the big dollar donors are there to say, we're unhappy with what you've been doing, not only these weird videos, but what are you doing at this fancy hotel using up all our money and flying here in a private plane, no less, and you haven't, as they said, he burned through 40% of his money or 60% of his money before even airing a real TV ad anywhere ever. What's going to happen when the real expensive stuff goes on? You're paying all TV level money to weirdo edgelords who put together stupid videos that have to be pulled in a day.
Yep.
So, okay, good. I'm glad they're all mad about that.
So Nicholas Grossman looked at the video that was pulled, which I just sent you. If you want to peek at it, the fascist one.
Okay.
And it says the positive thing about the DeSantis campaign and its fans is they think headlines about cracking down on LGBT people and images of what sure looks like shock troops marching under a Sonnenrad and old Nazi symbol.
Oh, yeah, right.
Is what Americans want, and proving that, thank God, it's not. Which is to say he's dropping in the polls.
Yes. Well, that's good. And and the whole thing seems to this fascist one seems to be based on that. What's it? Face that weird cartoon guy. What is that? Is that one of the Graper things? The
Graper, yeah, it looks kind of like a Pepe derivative.
Yeah, it's a. You'll recognize it if you've spent enough time online as a thing that will be meaningful to
people who are online.
Yeah,
and nobody else, not normies, not real people. And that's
they're
why
all
he's
just like,
sinking in the polls.
Why is there the weird cartoon in this thing? Where's the real people? And 50% of the people who recognize it will be, oh my God, I know that thing. That's from the fascist weirdos who had that Pepe the Frog thing going on.
Yeah,
bringing that back.
Here's some Fox News polling, which came out yesterday. Iowa, Trump 46, DeSantis 16, Scott 11. Again, the rise of Tim Scott. 46-16, DeSantis. DeSantis' only chance is to try to win in places like Iowa.
I guess.
Right? Because if Trump takes Iowa and New Hampshire, it's over.
Yeah. Are you, well?
And Scott is closing in on DeSantis for second place, and it's a far second place. Okay. South Carolina, Trump 48, Haley 14. Somebody with no
That's her
chance of winning.
state, though.
Yeah. And DeSantis 13. She's trailing. He's trailing Haley. He's in third place in South Carolina. How is he supposed to present to the donors? I'm the one you have to rally around because I'm the only one that can beat Trump. You can't even beat Nikki Haley.
Yeah. Although it is her, that one's her state, but even
Tim Scott's at 10.
Oh, Tim Scott. That's his state, too. Yeah. Well, there's two favorite, I don't know, kids, I guess, from South Carolina running in that. Neither of them are leading. And between them, they're still only half of what Trump has got. But there's
favorite
really
sons
no
and
room
daughters.
for,
That's
yes,
what you were reaching for.
Right. I'm like, well, yeah. This is a little bit of both. And everything in between. We want to include everybody here. But they would identify as favorite sons and daughters. Yes, absolutely. All right. Yeah, so I've just had a quick
the
look
point
at
is
this
DeSantis is in fact doing terribly. And, we started talking about the fall of DeSantis 2 weeks ago on the show before he went on vacation. And it's just continuing. And Pence is doing even worse.
Yes, well, he's terrible and deserves to.
And he can't bring himself to say January 6th was wrong and what Trump did was wrong. Only Christie can do that. Hutchinson can do that, but he's the 1%. He may not make the cut there.
But Pence should feel free to do it too, because honestly, you also will never make the cut. Go ahead.
Right. Also running, by the way, people like Larry Elder, Will Hurd, Suarez, that guy from Florida, who I don't know why he's running. I don't know. But there's a bunch of I never heard of them.
Yeah, Elder, I'm not even sure.
Larry Elder, he runs through everything.
Did he? Does he? All right. Well, good for him. He's healthy. Yeah. So we'll
there was a guy like that in a couple of cycles ago. I can't remember who kept moving from state to state to try to run their party, and Gary somebody or other, and then kept running as a candidate and kept losing.
Yes.
It'll come to me, but it doesn't matter.
Gary Johnson, are you thinking of? Is it
libertarian?
Because there was also the
hyper-conservative.
What's his name from Florida to Texas and back and forth? Yeah, but wasn't he?
It'll come to me, but
Allen.
It's from. Yeah, but somebody else even.
Oh, another one. Well, it's not Perry Johnson.
No,
that guy I would recognize.
You know what? It doesn't matter. These guys aren't going to win. They're like super duper also rans, and that's the end of that.
Sure.
So theme, Biden doing okay in the polls. If anything, his favorables are going up just a little bit. People are recognizing the economy's in good shape. Consumer confidence is rebounding tremendously, which is basically eggs and gas, in fact, are coming down. Yeah. And it's not just the one-time sale that you had there.
Yeah,
and,
right.
Yes, there's a bunch of clouds on the horizon. There's a UPS strike pending. There's other labor strikes, but that's actually a potential ticket for Biden to, burnish his labor credentials.
Yeah,
if labor says
bad,
stay out of the issue, and he stays out of the issue, it's good for him.
Right.
And if he does intervene and gets positive results the way he did in the railroad strike, that's good for him.
Yeah.
And these are things, in fact, that he can run on. So he's rising in the polls, rising in public opinion, while on the one hand, DeSantis is sinking, and the others are rising at DeSantis' expense, but not Trump's. Trump himself might be indicted as soon as today. Again.
No, good, yeah.
Right. The grand jury's done.
Haven't even
and
talked
so
about
we're
that.
waiting for something this week. Could be today, could be tomorrow. I always like to think of indictments as Tuesday's thing. Monday the grand jury meets and votes, and Tuesday they announce it.
You may be right.
Speaking indictment, but we'll see.
Yeah, we'll be
Hard
excited
to predict because it's all secret. You don't really know what's going on.
Well, now that I'm glad I appreciate that they waited till I was back. Last time I took some time off, big things happened, and I was wondering what the big thing might be, or couldn't you hold off until I got back? And mostly they did, so that's good news. But I thought it's possible. I don't know if is he arrested? Does he drop dead? Who knows what the hell
Well,
happened?
but meanwhile, Trump is spending a lot of money that he's raising, and he is raising money.
He's taking
on
other
lawyer
people's
bills.
money. On
So here's the Yahoo story. Trump spending so much donor cash on lawyer bills, there's not a lot left to fund an actual campaign, which is okay because he's going to wind up being a part-time campaigner. Aileen Cannon said that the documents trial is going to be in May.
Yeah.
All right. The New York trial is going to be in March. That leaves April open for Jack Smith to have a January 6th trial.
All right. Let's
and then maybe Fani Willis goes in June. And so Trump's going to spend 2 days a week campaigning and 3 days a week in court.
All right.
From now until the horizon.
Yeah, I guess he doesn't have to show up every day in court, but I think he likes that
but his lawyers
as a campaign.
See, the point is, he's only got like 3 lawyers, and they have to cover all these cases.
Oh, yeah.
He doesn't have to be there.
Right. But
I mean, the only scheduling problem they have that they have to juggle is when's he indicted. You don't want to indict him in the same day in different states.
They'll have to split
D.C. and Georgia, you want to do that on separate days, at least give them 24 hours. Right. But other than that, it's his lawyers. Yeah. And so for some reason, they show deference to the lawyer. Everybody's entitled to a good defense. That's what lawyers do. Defense lawyers will tell you everybody's entitled to have their best possible case presented to the courts. That's like Trump. Constitutional. It's fair. It's the American way. And rule of law. And so if the defense says, look, Your Honor, I would, the 3 Musketeers, I would like to challenge Athos at 12 and Porthos at 1 and, Aramis at 2. But you got to give me an hour to get from one place to the other, Give me an hour to finish the duel before I go on to the next one. And people say, okay, that's fair. We can do that, Judges. So they're not going to be like one on top of the other. But, legally speaking, they are because every month he's going to have something.
Well, that's all right. And he's probably fine with it. He's already planning on doing, courthouse steps, press conferences, et cetera, et cetera.
He probably wants it, he's arguing that all of these things should be televised because he wants his fan base to do it. The other thing that's happening, which is real, is he's threatening people online.
Oh, good.
Bad things are going to happen. Bad things like you never saw before. Things like that. That's what he's saying on True Social as of this morning.
That
that's
seems
a bad
fair.
thing. So keep an eye on that.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, like falling down the stairs, that would be a bad thing for him. I mean, I'd be all right with it. But that could be the bad thing that happens. Frozen tennis balls being thrown at him. I don't know. Whatever. There's a lot of bad things that can happen that could backfire on him. He, of course, means to threaten people with that. So
I told you that Israel passed that law. Supreme Court appeals have already been filed.
They're very fast acting.
Yeah.
All right. Well, usually, they say people, I don't know, how are Israelis on punctuality? Is they any better? All right.
Jewish Standard Time? No, they don't.
Right. Like, we'll get to that. Hold on a minute. But they were ready to go. They had months to work on it. Okay. Where are they going to find lawyers? All right. Just kidding. All right. Thanks, Greg. See you Wednesday.
All right.
All right. Wednesday. I will persevere. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. What to do for the next hour or so? Well, there's plenty to go on here, of course, and lots of things that I parked in Pocket. And now, because we've had the week off, I'm ready to have another series of pre-recorded shows where I get to all the stories that I didn't get to tell you yet, but I haven't even had a chance. But let me go back and pull up a couple of things from, I think, that would represent earlier in the week, but gosh, there's a lot. I saw a lot of things that were of interest towards the end of last week, middle of this past week, etc. And let's see. Oh, we can clear out a couple of these things, which were actually from. Oh, let's see. I have a couple. Things I meant to clear out into the archives that Rosalind McGregor had sent. And by the way, thanks again to Rosalind for helping carry our 3 1-hour show series with enough new material and backlog of old material that I was able to do I think like 2 segments a day, and then one tremendous. She was very, I think, glad to have the opportunity to be helpful with a 10+ minute segment, which is unusual, both in terms of what she allows herself and what we, I don't know if I would say we have a hard and fast rule about that, but 5 to 6 minutes is about the outside of how long we usually do our segments. But usually it's actually more limited by the amount of time people are comfortable taking up or producing that much content. But occasionally we've gotten offers of segments that were like 20+ minutes, and well, geez, that's actually kind of we'd probably rather have you on live and talk to you about things via Zoom or what we use, Skype, than do it pre-recorded. But sometimes a nap might be appreciated. Anyway, thanks again to Rosalind for sending all that stuff in. All right, and for keeping things sane as I was trying to put those hour programs together in the week before vacation and also pack at the same time, and it was a great relief. Thank you, Rosalind. Let's see. Other things, though. Yes. Right. Well, I think the big story, there were 2 or 3 interesting big stories. One directly political and one indirectly, that is to say, on the Supreme Court, which is not supposed to be political, but guess what? It actually is. So let's see. Story number 1, in terms of big news from the week that we would definitely have covered and discussed last week, but we didn't because instead I was at the beach I was getting up very early. I could have done a show, although the Wi-Fi was very spotty there. But waking up with the sun and reading these stories, like this one from the New York Times, which you all have doubtless seen, but probably, if you're big fans of the show, maybe you read it and said, oh, I wish he was on this week to talk about this one. The New York Times piece that very mildly expressed a very disturbing prospect. Trump and allies forge plans to increase presidential power in 2025, in much the same way that, for instance, Nicolae Ceausescu sought to increase presidential power in Romania in the face of a nascent uprising. And then, of course, they actually dealt with him the way perhaps we might have dealt with Donald Trump post-January 6th if this had been a different time in a different country. But it wasn't, and we have this now. And now he wants to be president again, and it looks like Republicans are content to let him try. Anyway, to say the least, to increase presidential power. Gee whiz, in 2025. The former president and his backers aim to strengthen the power of the White House and limit the independence of federal agencies, which has long been the Republican aim, of course. And as long and intricate and interesting as this article is, I will summarize it, I guess, up front. My reaction I'll summarize. I can't summarize the article for you because I haven't read all the way through it yet. But just because since many of you would already have read or discussed this elsewhere. What I found really fascinating about it was that this has been a Republican project for a long time. Donald Trump isn't the inventor of this by any means. But executive supremacy, I mean, you will recognize this maybe expressed in different terms, in different language. You'll say, oh, yes, right, okay. Imperial presidency. When Democrats tried to do it, Republicans described that as the imperial presidency. Bad thing to do. When Republicans are in office and they try to do it, this is the unitary executive theory. The idea that the president calls all the shots and should be allowed to have total and complete control of the entirety of the executive branch and control it all from the White House. And that these are things that when George W. Bush was in office and when they were in court, they called it the the unitary executive. When they were just trying to execute the policy in public, it was because he was allowed to do this because he was either the decider, as he would do in the informal sense, speaking to his people, I'm the decider. Or when he was speaking more formally, the unitary executive theory was expressed as, how did he put it? Oh, yes, right. This was commander-in-chief powers. And it was a very intentional misinterpretation of what that meant. I mean, the commander-in-chief powers are with respect to the military, and it's very clear that it's put that way, and it's very clear in the constitutional language, but he was conflating it as, well, I'm the commander-in-chief. That means I'm the commander of everything, not just the military, but the entirety of the government. I'm the commander of, and that's not actually, it's just not the way it was ever intended. It's not the way the wording works. But everyone was familiar with the phrase commander-in-chief, and everyone knew that the president was supposed to be that commander-in-chief. What it meant to be commander-in-chief, they did not know, and he did them no favors in explaining it to them because he explained it to them wrong. But anyway, this also may be recognizable to you as a Republican project and relitigating Watergate, if you've ever heard that phrase. I mean, we've used it, but and lots of others have used it as well. I don't even know who invented it, if it's the sort of thing that can be invented, if you can find a initial usage of it. I mean, relitigate is a real word, and Watergate was a real thing. So, I'm not going to claim, Bill Maher did, to have invented, there was political correctness. Well, I'm going to be politically incorrect. Trademark. Doesn't work like that either. Anyway, but relitigating Watergate, meaning that this unitary executive theory. I mean, do I have to explain all this again? I think so. Maybe just to get my own head around it. Post-Watergate, realizing what Richard Nixon had done. Richard Nixon was, I guess, the modern inventor of the unitary executive. I mean, it was a theory that existed a long time ago as well. I mean, if you remember being in history class and learning about the spoils system, way back in Andrew Jackson times, when it was generally viewed as within the rights of the presidency to award jobs in the executive branch to everybody and to do it directly as a matter of political patronage. That led to a lot of accurate accusations of corruption and a series of reforms over the decades, but never really so formally enshrined as they were post-Watergate. Nixon still believed and practiced this sort of a modified spoils system, but also believed in the idea, well, as you know, that he expressed it himself, if the president does it, that means it's not illegal. There were very few legal limitations on the presidency in Nixon's view. And then, as it turns out, the rest of the country and the judiciary were, and the Congress that was elected by the people who also felt that there needed to be limitations, disagreed and either imposed such limitations directly through legislation or were gratified to see the judiciary impose limitations by finding against this expansive view of executive power post-Watergate. And anyway, so Watergate imposed a lot of these limitations that we recognize and still have in place today. For instance, in Nixon's time, you could basically raise whatever money you wanted to raise and use it for whatever you wanted to use it for, and there didn't need to be any disclosure about where cash came from. And the idea of having massive political slush funds, that they actually even called slush funds, they gave them the bad connotation, it was something that Nixon used very freely. And one of the post-Watergate reforms, the establishment of the Federal Election Commission, the need for disclosure, and the campaign finance laws and limitations on the amount that people could give, and prohibition on, supposedly, prohibition on the use of corporate funds, et cetera, all these things that shape our modern political landscape. Flawed as they are, were new inventions which Republicans from the time post-Watergate on have been pushing back on and hoping to roll back or eliminate entirely. And the big irony to me in all of this was that it was a Dick Cheney project in particular to relitigate Watergate, to push back and eliminate these restrictions that have been imposed post-Watergate, really to restrict Republican presidents from running roughshod over the system because, well, it was certainly meant to restrict everybody from doing it too, but Democrats just rarely strayed into that territory because it was kind of at the heart for many decades of the Democratic ethos was, well, we don't want to do things that could get us accused of approaching Watergate again, because that was the worst thing ever until, of course, Trump came along. But the big irony here is that it was the Cheney family, really, whose project it was to roll back these restrictions, to relitigate Watergate and re-expand presidential power. And now, here it is, pushing back against that supercharged effort undertaken by Trump and his administration / minions, that opposition to which has gotten the Cheney party expelled from Republican politics. It was a Republican project since forever and driven largely by one Cheney, and then the second generation of Cheneys interestingly enough, in defense of her father's legacy, ended up opposing the whole project, at least insofar as the project was left in Trump's hands. It wasn't that they were opposed to rolling back the restrictions. They were opposed to letting Trump be the one to drive the process because he was personally crazy, irresponsible, and had no real understanding of the underlying legal underpinnings that Dick Cheney imagined he had actually invented for himself, and that undergirded, in his opinion, his legalistic attack on the post-Watergate legacy. I don't think that Liz Cheney was opposed to rolling those restrictions back, but it had to be done in orderly fashion, i.e. as defined by the Cheneys, I guess. And when it wasn't, she became alarmed enough to actually do something about it and then get herself more or less banished from the party. I don't know. I just find that very interesting. Jonathan Swan, Charlie Savage, and Maggie Haberman find different aspects of this whole project interesting, and they describe it this way. Donald J. Trump and his allies are planning a sweeping expansion of presidential power over the machinery of government if voters return him to the White House in 2025, reshaping the structure of the executive branch to concentrate far greater authority directly in his hands. Not necessarily the president's hands, his hands. I don't know that every Republican president will have as much power as he envisions having for himself. And that, of course, is euphemistic and whitewashing. He, plans to assume full control of everything, whether it's legal, constitutional, or not. And if the Constitution stands in his way, he simply says, well, let's run roughshod over it and see if the courts are wimpy enough that, as wimpy as I think they are, we can push them out of the way and either make everyone who believed what we were doing wrong, or we simply threaten them and tell them to go with our direction, or else we'll sick the mob on them, or we let them do what they're going to do. They rule against us, and we say, well, how many troops do you have? But they're trying their best to normalize it so that it doesn't look like things are going too crazy. Now I think I have a theme here where I can go after this one. All right. Their plans to centralize more power in the Oval Office stretch far beyond the former president's recent remarks that he would order a criminal investigation into his political rival, President Biden. Remember that he actually did do that during his presidency, and he got impeached for it. That was impeachment number 1. Signaling his intent to end the post-Watergate norm of Justice Department independence from White House political control. That grand tradition of the Department of Justice functioning as a supposedly neutral arbiter of our system of justice. It's always going to be, some margin for error, let's say, on either side in all of this. But it was not, I guess, universally acknowledged that the president really was supposed to be hands off about DOJ investigations of anybody, his friends, his enemies, anybody. That was not generally acknowledged, certainly not acknowledged by the president until post-Watergate times. Nixon believed that the Department of Justice was a mechanism for his use. I'm the president. I was entrusted with the use of the Department of Justice, the use of the Internal Revenue Service, the use of everything for whatever purposes I see fit, really. America basically gave me carte blanche by electing me. He said that we trust you to use these mechanisms any way you want. That's not the way the people viewed it, and that's how he ended up himself on the verge of impeachment, forced to resign, and generally reviled for decades thereafter. Now, back to the story. Trump and his associates have a broader goal, if you can believe it. What's broader than that? To alter the balance of power by increasing the president's authority over every part of the federal government that now operates by either law or tradition with any measure of independence from political interference by the White House, according to a review of his campaign policy proposals and interviews with people close to him. This is, of course, the precisely the malady of which Republicans in the House of Representatives now complain, that the Biden administration is weaponizing government, but Donald Trump plans to run on the platform of weaponizing government. But it's, as you know, Gimme-tarian through and through. It is bad when someone else weaponizes government. It is good when I weaponize government. But it's not supposed to work that way. And one of the reasons that it's poorly received here in America ordinarily when you say you're going to do something like that is because we believe supposedly in this rule of law, and that if the president, when it's a Republican, can do these things, the fear is, and what usually keeps Republicans in line and stops them from supporting these sorts of power grabs ordinarily, for the most part, is the fear that the same power will accrue to a Democrat at some point. But now that they've gotten rid of that fear, and they've installed a Supreme Court that will do them that favor and not allow Democrats to exercise that power, but will allow Republicans to exercise that power, they've lost the fear of the reciprocal powers, devolving to someone else or being passed on anyway to someone of a different party. They now no longer believe that would actually be a functional reality, so they're not afraid anymore. And as a result, things are spinning out of control. All right. Mr. Trump intends to bring independent agencies like the Federal Communications Commission, which makes and enforces rules for television and internet companies, and the Federal Trade Commission, which enforces various antitrust and other consumer protections rules against businesses, under direct presidential control. In other words, companies run by Democrats will be targeted for enforcement. Companies run by Republicans will be able to run roughshod over anyone and everyone so long as they kick back enough money to the Trump organization, whether we mean the corporate Trump organization or the overall Trump Incorporated that now would encompass the federal government itself. Very Putin-like in his approach to things, and he's made no secret, certainly, that that's his model, and now he's saying so, except that for whatever reason, Jonathan Swan, Charlie Savage, and Maggie Haberman are reluctant to say so. But that's what you have me for. He wants to revive the practice of impounding funds, refusing to spend money that Congress has appropriated for programs that a president doesn't like, a tactic that lawmakers banned under President Richard Nixon. There's an Anti-Impoundment Act. He invented this idea saying that it was essentially, it's the practice, the rejection by the courts and Congress of which led to latter-day attempts, things that you might remember from some of you will remember the impoundment, of course, and if you don't, because you're not quite that old, you'll remember the old line item veto idea. The line item veto was a, weak tea version of impoundment that they thought they might be able to construct statutorily for the president to do this, to go through, be able to comb through the budget and like you're sitting at your kitchen table and just say, well, we just can't afford this one, except it's usually, I just don't like this one. So we'll get rid of that. Anyway, that didn't stand constitutional muster either. And so they ended up having to come up with an even weaker T version of it called enhanced rescissions. And that's still on the books, I think. But anyway, the idea here is the basic takeaway. Richard Nixon said, I, as president, have the power to do this thing. And both the courts and Congress said, no, you don't. And even if by some miracle a court would agree that you did, we intend to take that power away from you very specifically by legislating on it and saying directly, we, as an act of Congress, we say, no, you don't have this power. And how many years later, Donald Trump says, well, maybe I do have this power. Maybe the legislation against it doesn't mean anything because no one's going to do anything. No one's going to arrest me because I'll have them killed or arrested and investigated at a minimum if they try to do this to me. That's why I'm taking over every aspect of the federal government. Anybody who tries to enforce this ban on impoundment of funds against me will find themselves in a, well, it's time for some traffic problems in their lives to show you again. Remember that Chris Christie is no better than Donald Trump sometimes when it comes to things like this. Let's see, there's more. He intends to strip employment protections from tens of thousands of career civil servants, making it easier to replace them if they are deemed obstacles to his agenda. Again, a throwback to the Andrew Jackson spoils system, which if you remember anything at all from, middle school, high school history, just as everybody sort of kind of remembers in the back of their head, oh yeah, isn't court packing bad? Because I remember there's being something about that in history and it didn't work out right. And that was FDR. And pretty much FDR, I would imagine, having been elected 4 times, got whatever he wanted on these things. Well, that was never true anyway, but that's the impression people get. But he didn't get this thing, so it must be a bad thing. If you remember anything at all about the spoils system, you probably remember that is a bad thing. What he's trying to reinvent here is the spoils system. Why they don't call it that, I'm not sure. But, that's one of the benefits of PR spin. You get to reinvent things, put new terms on things. I was going to say something about this when we were discussing the Florida curriculum about slavery with Greg a while ago. This is something else that it was bugging me during the week, that they were revising these. It's no surprise, of course, Republicans trying to dumb down the understanding of slavery such that it would end up looking like, Southern white racist slavers were not as bad as all that, whatever that's supposed to even mean. But it keeps bothering me that once again, the terminology is standing in the way here. Like the same people trying to define slavery down and dumb the understanding of it down are the same people who go crazy at the drop of a hat if someone suggests, even invokes the term human trafficking. That's a hair trigger for Q nuts and MAGA weirdos and even non-lunatic not even necessarily Republicans, but human trafficking, of course, inspires revulsion in everyone, and it's interesting. It's been leveraged by the extreme right in order to say, well, Democrats are actually pro human trafficking, or they're protecting human traffickers at the border, and human trafficking. It's the worst thing ever, and they all have sort of agreed among themselves that that's the worst charge that you could level against someone, but not because they wanted to do anything about preventing human trafficking, but rather they wanted to make it a charge so reviled and disgusting that any time that they wanted to get rid of someone politically, they could accuse them of doing that, and everyone would automatically say that's a horrific thing. But at the same time, they seem to have missed the reality that slavery is, by definition, is human trafficking. You're buying and selling humans to exploit for various purposes. And if you think that, well, not that this would persuade any of these Republicans about it, well, they would say, well, we mean human trafficking for sexual exploitation. Yeah, well, that's what they were doing with the slaves also. So don't forget that. But at any rate, human trafficking, more or less, by definition, slavery fits right in there. That's what it is. It is human trafficking. So substitute that terminology, by the way, when you're thinking about what Ron DeSantis is doing. Substitute slavery and all the things associated with it for human trafficking, and try to get away with that statement. Try going out. How long will the Q nuts stand around for Ron DeSantis or anybody else saying, well, human trafficking is really not that bad? I think people have the wrong idea about human trafficking. Some of the human traffickers were really nice. In fact, some of the people trafficked by human traffickers gained valuable skills that they could sell on the marketplace. And I mean, that's as true as it ever was about slavery, which is to say, no, it really isn't. But just try to get away with that one. That human trafficking is really not that bad. They got a bad rap. Some of the human traffickers were good to their victims and taught them valuable things. Yeah, it's not going to work. And they're going to say, well, it's not the same thing, but it is the same thing. It's definitionally the same thing. Anyway, same thing here. To say, well, he intends to strip employment protections from tens of thousands of career civil servants and making it easier to replace them if they're deemed obstacles to his agenda. That's the spoils system that led to such immense corruption that it was considered a major step forward and victory for democracy and equality and everything. Oh, not equality necessarily, but democracy in America, and a major blow against corruption. And a major barrier to corruption to get rid of the spoils system. But it's also from an era that we kind of forget about in American history for whatever reason. And there's too much of it. Kids can't understand it. They learn, 1776, Civil War. Thankfully, still civil rights movement still makes the cut. But, Ron DeSantis is trying to take care of that, as well as rewriting the history on the Civil War. Anyway, there's much more to this, but you can see, I don't know, just how bad they are at expressing it. Not that I'm any better. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Yes, as I left, I said, my complaint was about how bad the, journalists in general, and I mean, there's a mixed bag of journalists in the byline of this one. Maggie Haberman, not a lot of people's favorite. Charlie Savage, though, I got to believe he knows what's going on, but he's hemmed in, I think, by both probably by the legal department and just the general mores of the New York Times. They just don't like to call things out as radicalism if they don't have to. which, okay, that's tradition, but it doesn't really serve us, stand us in good stead here with what's actually being threatened. But I'm no better at expressing it sometimes than they are, except if they sit down and write it out and go through an editorial process, and I'm just winging it. But anyway, I shouldn't hold myself out as separate and apart from them in terms of not being able to express things adequately all the time. But I do think we go a little further and get a little closer to the truth than they allow themselves to go. I think they probably personally see it, but they do feel, I think, somewhat constrained. So where were we with this? One, we had just left off in saying, call it what it is. It's the reinstatement of the Jacksonian spoils system. And that's something that we ought all to have learned from history, if we remember anything. That is just one of those bad things that I just vaguely feel like, hey, that's bad. Isn't that a thing that we thought was terrible at one point? Oh, yeah, that's right. But it's, in a less remembered segment of our history class for whatever reason. At any rate, he also, it says here, plans, that is to say Trump, plans to scour, well, he doesn't. He plans to have someone else scour the intelligence agencies, the State Department, and the defense bureaucracies to remove officials he has vilified as, quote, the sick political class that hates our country, which is just a more expressive way, perhaps, of actually doing what Dick Cheney, again, just to bring this theme back, wanted to do specifically with the intelligence agencies, not necessarily the entire relitigation of Watergate scheme, but that too. But specifically, Dick Cheney was, of course, upset. You remember, post 9/11 and handling of the war in Iraq, et cetera, that he was very upset, Dick Cheney was, that there were too many layers of bureaucracy keeping the raw intelligence being gathered in the field from being directly, remember the terminology, stovepiped to him. Stop analyzing things and stop being cautious about possibly inflammatory intelligence. Just give it straight to me and let me inflame it and then use it for my purposes, whether or not after analysis you would ordinarily have thought that you would agree with my conclusions. Let me make my conclusions, promulgate them, and propagate policy based on those conclusions before you even had a chance to analyze whether or not this means anything close to the things I say it means. Now Trump wants to be able to do it too, and there's no Cheneys left to stop him because he's successfully purged them from the party because they saw that this was a problem, in his hands anyway, and called it out. So, anyway, back to the article. The president's plan should be to fundamentally reorient the federal government in a way that hasn't been done since FDR's New Deal, said John McEntee, a former White House personnel chief who began Mr. Trump's systematic attempt to sweep out officials deemed to be disloyal in 2020 and who is now involved in mapping out the new approach. Interestingly, again, I guess they think that they can, with Republicans, make FDR the enemy here, the bad guy, and say, well, it hasn't been done since FDR's New Deal, which was a terrible thing anyway among conservatives. Really, though, he's talking about a program in size and scope and power that hasn't been done since Andrew Jackson and the spoils system. And Jackson was a Democrat, so I don't see why he can't blame it on him. But for whatever reason, he's, the Democrat that Donald Trump claims to like, having put up the Andrew Jackson portrait in the Oval Office while he was there, to dismay of some. And, many people pointed out how ridiculous that was. But they can't very well go blaming their big hero for the worst thing to ever happen to the civil service in the history of the country. But, well, there you have it. That's what really ought to be mentioned here. Our current executive branch, Mr. McEntee added, was conceived of by liberals for the purpose of promulgating liberal policies. Yes, but liberal in the sense of like the liberal arts, like based on reality and science and data and realism versus why don't you justism, which is a bad thing. Anyway, there is no way to make the existing structure function in a conservative manner, which is interesting. It's not enough to get the personnel right. What's necessary is a complete system overhaul. What he's trying to say here, of course, is there's no way to govern as a conservative without complete dictatorial authority, because people will disagree with the agenda as outlined by modern conservatives. They disagree with it. We found out from polls and from Greg reading those polls at the beginning of the show. There's no real consensus of any kind, even among conservatives, self-identified conservative activists, even, for the kind of agenda that some of these would-be dictators would like to impose. So we can't have popular authority directing things. We need to have dictatorial authority directing these things. And there's no way to do that unless, of course, you assume dictatorial control of the entire policy and governmental apparatus. Otherwise, people will object and make their objections known. And we can't have that. So let's get rid of it. Mr. Trump and his advisors are making no secret of their intentions, proclaiming them in rallies and on his campaign website, describing them in white papers and openly discussing them, which should, of course, by all means be considered a permission structure for the New York Times to say that this is a Jacksonian spoils system, that this is relitigating Watergate. All of these things should be obvious. They're certainly obvious, I think, to Charlie Savage. But for whatever reason, it's not done. You simply don't say that. And I keep hinting, and I'm thinking ahead. I got to keep reading or I'll never get to it. But there's something else that will complement some of that thinking that I ought to add to the show. What we're trying to do is identify the pockets of independence and get rid of them and seize them. It's the same thing as getting rid of them, said Russell T. Vogt, who ran the Office of Management and Budget in the Trump White House and now runs a policy organization, the Center for Renewing America, by bringing it back to Jacksonian times. What a renewal. The strategy in talking openly about such paradigm-shifting ideas before the election, Mr. Vogt said, is to plant a flag, both to shift the debate and later to be able to claim a mandate. He said he was delighted to see few of Mr. Trump's Republican primary rivals defend the norm of Justice Department independence after the former president openly attacked it. That's a huge mistake for them, but Chris Christie won't make that mistake, I guess. Won't help him any, but he's not doing it. Stephen Chung, a spokesman for Trump's campaign, said in a statement that the former president has, quote, laid out a bold and transparent agenda for his second term, something no other candidate has done. No other candidate is vying for a second term, but I'm sure that's not what he meant. He added, voters will know exactly how President Trump will supercharge the economy, bring down inflation, secure the border, protect communities, and eradicate the deep state that works against Americans once and for all. So I'm sure he'll do a much better job than he did his first time when he actually won election, based on a premise of, we're going to make things great for everybody. I've got a plan. Healthcare will be great. I got a great one. We just have to make great deals. Yeah. Super transparent. The two driving forces of this effort to reshape the executive branch are Mr. Trump's own campaign policy shop and a well-funded network of conservative groups. The first one is not anything. It's just people who will announce what the well-funded network of conservative groups tell them to announce. That's where the campaign policy shop comes in, many of which are populated by former senior Trump administration officials and who would most likely play key roles in any second term. Mr. Vogt and Mr. McEntee are involved in Project 2025, a $22 million presidential transition operation that is preparing policies, personnel lists, and transition plans to recommend to any Republican who may win the 2024 election. The transition project, the scale of which is unprecedented in conservative politics, is led by the Heritage Foundation, a think tank that has shaped personnel and policies of Republican administrations since the Reagan presidency, which was also a relitigate Watergate presidency. And again, reminder, this is going to be made available, at least as they say it, to anyone who happens to win any Republican who may happen to win the 2024 election. Although I guess it's possible that Trump might somehow, I don't know how much control he has over the funding, but attempt to block it or pull the plug on it. This was meant for me and no one else. But It's a good reminder for anybody who might think, well, I'm going to vote for somebody else. We need an alternative to Trump. He did a great job, but it's time for new leadership. Leadership isn't going to be new. The intention is to impose a second Trump term, no matter who wins the Republican nomination. Anyway, that work at Heritage dovetails with the plans on the Trump campaign website to expand presidential powers that were drafted primarily by two of Trump's advisors, Vincent Haley and Ross Worthington. Don't know him. With input from other advisors, including Stephen Miller, who we do know, the architect of the former president's hardline immigration agenda. Some elements of the plan have been floated when Trump was in office, but were impeded by internal concerns that they would be unworkable and could lead to setbacks. Now they don't care. As for some veterans of Trump's turbulent White House who came to question his fitness for leadership, the prospect of removing guardrails and centralizing even greater power over government directly in his hands, his tiny, tiny hands, sounded like a recipe for mayhem. It would be chaotic, of course. Even if it was well done, it would be chaotic. Said John Kelly, Mr. Trump's second White House chief of staff. It just simply would be chaotic because he'd continually be trying to exceed his authority, but the sycophants would go along with it. It would be a nonstop gunfight with the Congress and the courts. Maybe. The agenda being pursued has deep roots in the decade-long effort by conservative legal thinkers to undercut what has become known as the administrative state, what you and I know as the post-Watergate consensus, really. Agencies that enact regulations aimed at keeping the air and water clean and food, drugs, and consumer products safe. But that cut into business profits. It actually is a post-Watergate regime. Actually, some of it predates at least the conclusion of Watergate because they were, in fact, Nixon administration initiatives. Clean Water and Clean Air Act. But anyway, yes, now sort of known as the liberal consensus, the modern consensus of how people ought to be governing. I mean, you can make things more or less conservative within this framework, but I guess the new conservative approach is this framework is inherently anti-conservative, but they think everything is anti-conservative. They think television is anti-conservative, movies are anti-conservative, government is anti-conservative, FBI is anti-conservative. That's their whole push, is that everybody thinks, that all of them think that everything is anti-conservative. And so we should get rid of everything. That way there won't be any anti-conservatism, except there'll just be people who say, these people are terrible and they drive us to ruin. Let's get rid of them. And maybe we get rid of them once and for all if they pull another stunt like January 6th, for instance. Anyway, it's legal. So this is, I think, probably Charlie Savage and maybe the others in a nod towards the post-Watergate, the relitigation idea. Its legal underpinning is a maximalist version of the so-called unitary executive theory. I see Charlie in that one. The legal theory rejects the idea that the government is composed of three separate branches with overlapping powers to check and balance each other. Now, you learned that was absolutely, positively, foundationally the case when you were in school, right? How many branches of government? Three. They're separate branches. They have equal powers. They balance one another with checks and balances. That's as true to you as the fact that there is a constitution. But the plan is to make you pre-wrong. How many branches of government are there? One, a dictator, Donald Trump. The other things are there as mechanisms to serve his will. Judiciary branch, to rubber stamp the legality of everything I do. The legislative branch, there either for him to beat up on or to veto everything that they do, or to strong arm them into doing crazier and crazier parts of his bidding. Seems to be working, though. But this is the plan, to erase the idea of three separate branches of government. This is subtly making the point that should be the headline, but the Times culture is just not about that, so they're putting it in here in the, 20th paragraph. The legal theory rejects the idea that the government is composed of three separate branches. Just rejects it, with overlapping powers to check and balance each other. Instead, the theory's adherents if there are any, argue that Article 2 of the Constitution gives the president complete control of the executive branch, so Congress cannot empower agency heads to make decisions or restrict the president's ability to fire them. Reagan administration lawyers developed the theory as they sought to advance a deregulatory agenda. Why the framers made it the second article, I'm not really sure. Sure, they made a conscious choice to make Congress the first branch, the first article. Maybe it was just self-centered of them, but because they were mostly going to serve in that role. Very few of them were going to ascend to the presidency, or like they eventually did, but only one at a time. Whereas they might all serve together in Congress, as it turns out not to be true. It turned out not to be true, but anyway, that's pretty remarkable, don't you think? That the reality of it is that there's really only one branch, and it's the presidency. And it was arguably, you may remember having been taught that the original founding presumption was that Congress, the legislative branch, would probably be predominant, and the president was there to sort of do, make sure everything ran smoothly and execute the laws properly and faithfully, etc. One decision maker where things really had to be broken through, but otherwise contemplative and deliberative decision making elsewhere in the government. But hey, screw all of that. Right? Why not just stand it on its head? And by the way, the chief complaint of all of these conservatives about FDR, why they make him the villain and all these things, was because he was the one that, in their view, expanded presidential authority so greatly and screwed everything up and got us away from the founding principles and established the administrative state. And we're going to smash the administrative state and instead replace it with a dictatorial state. Because remember, we're against aggregating too much power in the hands of one person. Unless, of course, it's me. That's very gimmitarian of them. Anyway, the notion of independent federal agencies or federal employees who don't answer to the president violates the very foundation of our democratic republic. It actually is the very foundation of our democratic republic, said Kevin D. Roberts, the president of the Heritage Foundation, adding that the contributors to Project 2025 are committed to dismantling this rogue administrative state. Personal power has always been a driving force for Mr. Trump, of course. So that's what, this is the Maggie Haberman section, I think, of the thing. Acknowledging that it's not really a political ideology for Trump so much as this is the way I think everything ought to run in my personal life and, of course, in your personal life, because who are you? You're only barely a person. I'm me, Donald Trump, and everyone should listen to me. He often gestures toward it in a more simplistic manner, as he often does with everything, such as in 2019 when he declared to a cheering crowd, "I have an Article 2, where I have the right to do whatever I want as president." And that was about the dumbest thing that anybody who ever, certainly anyone who won the presidency has ever said about the presidency. But one, they plan on returning him to it. And two, the New York Times is prepared to normalize this by saying that it was like a real philosophy. And of course, his own apparatus is preparing to make you pre-wrong about thinking that that was the dumbest thing that anyone had ever said about the presidency. Now it's just true. It was prescient. Don't you see? He's a genius. You were the moron all along. Mr. Trump made the remark in reference to his claimed ability to directly fire Robert Mueller. Of course, it was small bore thing. I can do whatever I want. I can get rid of the guy who's bothering me. But now the Heritage Foundation has turned it into foundational American philosophy. Amazing. Not just to get rid of a guy who's bothering me, but this is the way the government ought to have run. This is exactly what George Washington wanted when he stepped down after 2 terms and admonished everybody else to basically do the same and return to private life after a certain period of time. Anyway, Mr. Trump made the remark in reference to Mueller, the special counsel in the Russia inquiry, which primed his hostility toward law enforcement and intelligence agencies. He also tried to get a subordinate to have Mr. Mueller ousted, but it was defied. Early in Trump's presidency, his chief strategist, Stephen K.G.B. Bannon, promised a, quote, deconstruction of the administrative state, but Mr. Trump installed people in other key roles who ended up telling him that more radical ideas were unworkable or illegal, which they were. In the final year of his presidency, he told his aides he was fed up with being constrained by subordinates or law, for that matter, which he also considers a subordinate. Now, Mr. Trump is laying out a far more expansive vision of power in any second term, and in contrast with his disorganized transition after his surprise 2016 victory, I would put that in quotes, he now benefits from a well-funded policymaking infrastructure led by former officials who did not break with him after his attempts to overturn the 2020 election and the January 6, 2021 attack on the Capitol, for which he ought to have been Ceausescu'd in the Rayburn Horseshoe on January 7th. That's an unpopular idea. A controversial idea, let's say. Anyway, one idea the people around Mr. Trump have developed centers on bringing independent agencies under his thumb, meaning they would not be independent. Congress created these specialized technocratic agencies inside the executive branch and delegated to them some of its power to make rules for society, but it did so on the condition that it was not simply handing off that power to presidents to wield like kings, putting commissioners atop them, who presidents appoint but generally cannot fire before their terms end, while using its control of their budgets to keep them partly accountable to lawmakers as well. Agency actions are also subject to court review, of course. Presidents of both parties have chafed at the agency's independence. For FDR, of course, whose New Deal created many of them, endorsed a proposal in 1937 to fold them all into cabinet departments under his control, but Congress did not enact it. Later, presidents sought to impose greater control over non-independent agencies Congress created, like the Environmental Protection Agency, which is run by an administrator whom a president can remove at will. For example, President Ronald Reagan issued executive orders requiring non-independent agencies to submit proposed regulations to the White House for review. But overall, presidents have largely left the independent agencies alone. Mr. Trump's allies are preparing to change that. One of the independent agencies, by the way, that would most interest him, the IRS, so that he can, in fact, say, audit everyone who's a Democrat and end the audits against everyone who's a Republican, or whatever he wants to do with it. Anyway, they're preparing to change that, drafting an executive order requiring independent agencies to submit actions to the White House for review. Trump endorsed the idea on his campaign website, vowing to bring them under presidential authority. That's the most mild version of it. Such an order was drafted in Mr. Trump's first term and blessed by the Justice Department, but never issued amid internal concerns. That is to say, that the Justice Department shouldn't have blessed it. Some of the concerns were over how to carry out reviews for agencies that are headed by multiple commissioners and subject to administrative procedures and open meeting laws, as well as over how the markets would react if the order chipped away at the Federal Reserve's independence. People familiar with the matter said. The Federal Reserve was ultimately exempted in the draft executive order, but Mr. Trump did not sign it before his presidency ended. If Trump and his allies got another shot at power, the independence of the Federal Reserve, an institution Trump publicly railed against as president, could be up for debate. Notably, the Trump campaign's website discussion of bringing independent agencies under federal control is silent on whether that includes the Fed. All right, we're getting towards the end of this, but there's quite a bit left. I want to shift, though, just for a couple of minutes. I think you get the idea of all of this. But there are important details that should not be ignored. But as I've been complaining about the Times and their inability or unwillingness to call things out, I think, quite as directly as we do. And maybe this has something to do with it. Just sort of it's a journalistic instinct, I think, in general. And it doesn't just afflict us here in the United States. I happened to see over the weekend, interesting thing on Mastodon, passed on into my timeline by someone else, thanks to the discussion from Raven Onthill. Do I have that? Onthill, who passed on this Thomas Zimmer thread in which he says Professor Zimmer tries to explain the Roberts Court to the German press, not the entire U.S. government, but the SCOTUS, to the German press and gets the same treatment that Ornstein and Mann did. Everyone remembers that, right? And Greg was clear in bringing this up years ago when they wrote what was it? Just Say It. Was it the essay, the book? Do I have the title right? But the idea was, I can't even remember the actual title, but just say it, just admit it. The Republicans are the problem. And clearly outlining this regression to dictatorial authoritarianism that we now see being openly espoused by Trump as a campaign platform. What was the Zimmer thread? Let's spend the last couple minutes on that. Thomas Zimmer, beginning on a thread on July 7th, explaining that a major German newspaper had asked him, he says me because it's first person, asked me to write an opinion piece on the Supreme Court. Then they refused to publish it because they regard my argument that the right-wing majority stands in direct opposition to multiracial pluralistic democracy and the modern state as too extreme. Interesting, right? My bad, I guess, for trying to sneak in some subversive left-wing radicalism, like describing the actual majority on the court, not as nonpartisan conservatives, but as part of the right-wing political project and the spearhead of the reactionary assault to the post-1960s civil rights order. He's correct, of course. You think hagiographic myths, do I have that right? Hagiographic myths to play a frustratingly large role in shaping mainstream Supreme Court discourse in the U.S.? You ain't seen nothing yet. And I would argue, of course, they play a frustratingly large role in shaping the mainstream discourse about the entirety of the government in the U.S., as witnessed by this headline on this New York Times and the theme of this New York Times piece. Anyway, you ain't seen nothing yet. Easiest way to get yourself branded as a left-wing radical in Germany is to suggest that the court might be a problem for democracy. Interesting, because of course we all believe that here, and it's totally mainstream. And he says so. Find yourself someone, he says, who looks at you the way Germany's mainstream political and journalistic class looks at the Supreme Court. Even John Roberts himself probably thinks the German perspective on John Roberts and his institution is a little too romantic. Clearly, the editor, as he says, is well within his rights to kill the piece. I am not being canceled here. Although I will say there is something weird, he's right, about asking an academic observer for their assessment and then rejecting it because you don't agree. So you're just looking for confirmation? That doesn't seem very journalistic either. As an editor, you obviously don't publish the piece if you think it's garbage or complete nonsense. That's what I find telling. When it comes to the Supreme Court, what counts as a moderate left critique over here is something that you would read actually and would actually make it through in the Washington Post or the New York Times is deemed too out there in Germany. Very strange, right? So I'm a little late in the outro music, but let's read the rest of this and then get out of here for the day. I rarely try to intervene in a German discourse on U.S. politics, even though I am German myself, Thomas Zimmer says. Almost every time I do, it's an extremely frustrating experience. Stuff that is uncontroversial outside right-wing circles over here usually gets branded as radical left-wing activism immediately. The German mainstream discourse is a disaster, with few exceptions. It ranges from David Brooks-style centrism in liberal papers to proper reactionary garbage in conservative outlets. Yascha Mounk is regarded as a liberal oracle. Anti-wokeism reigns supreme everywhere. This piece, by the way, is a condensed, he offers, 750-word version of the long essay that I published via my newsletter on Sunday. He links to it. The Rogue Court versus Modern Democracy. But he says it's in German, so it won't be useful to most people who follow me here, but maybe I'll publish it via the newsletter just to have it out there as a kind of a companion piece to the longer essay. Anyway, the point is very true, and really Raven made the point as well as Zimmer did himself. When you call out the truth for a while, you get expelled from the consensus of normalcy.
Listening to Kagro in the morning with David Waldman.
Anyway, lots more to read in that New York Times piece. Perhaps we'll go over that, plus lots more to catch up on all of this week. And, of course, lots more to catch up on with the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, thanks to Justice Putnam. Coming up next right here on Netroots Radio, the usual assortment of news from around the country and around the world. Coming up next. We'll see you tomorrow.